Hey everybody, Mr. Regan here. Hopefully we have some idea about how we're really beginning to think about and answer our investigating question, because now we're going to create an experiment that's going to help us investigate this and kind of figure out what's going on with our space pod. And to do that, we're going to have to begin thinking about the variables within our new experiment. So we've talked about variables before. Okay, variables are the things within our experiment that we as scientists manipulate, or we observe, or we control in order to get results to figure out, well, what's going on? What's happening in this situation? So if you remember before, we had an experiment where we used a lid, we had our toilet paper spring, and we had different variables to see how does force affect the velocity of my our lid here in this situation. So the force of our spring representing our thrusters, and then our pod being represented by the lid. And we talked about three types of variables, and you'll see those kind of in the bottom left of your screen: the independent variable, the dependent variable, and the control variable. So our independent variable is what we as scientists are manipulating and changing within our experiment in order to create results, in order to create change, to see what's going on. It's what we want to manipulate. So in this last lab we were manipulating or changing the force. We would apply different forces at point number 1, 2, and 3 on my spring, okay? And those forces were our independent variables, what we were looking to change to create results within our experiment. So we then would apply that independent variable, our different forces, to our pod in order to observe the change to the pod, or in this case, the velocity. So we looked at how a stronger force would create a larger change in velocity, and how a weaker force would create a smaller change in velocity. So we were testing our different forces in order to observe the change to this object's velocity. And in order to make sure we had good results, we had to have our control variables. Our control variables were the things we kept the same throughout the experiment. So maybe the surface, we made sure that every test was on the same surface. We didn't go from the rug to a smooth table. We made the pod the same, okay? We made sure we had the same pod and it didn't have different things on it. And we made sure that we used the same spring each time. So our independent variable was what we were changing, in that case, the force. The dependent variable is what we were observing change, which was our velocity. Our controls were things like the table and such. Now, that's our review. This experiment doesn't work with our new pod situation. We know that the force, okay, of our space pod thrusters was not changing. We had the same normal amount of force. So we need to create a new experiment using the different tools and things available to us that we saw in the last kind of video. So we've set up a mock experiment in the screen you see over here. And let's go ahead and talk about how this experiment's going to work. And we're going to see if you can identify the three variables within this experiment. So if you'll notice a few things. Number one, I got a timer. I have a ping pong ball, a golf ball. We have our meter stick here. And the distance between where the balls start to the end or the box is about 100 centimeters, okay? And what we're going to be doing is we are going to be taking my spring, picking a specific force, maybe it's force 1, force 2, force 3, and we are going to time the ball from the start, which is where it gets hit with the spring, and we're going to stop the timer when it gets all the way down and hits the box at that 100 centimeter distance, okay? So what that might look like is I would turn my timer on, okay? I would pull my spring back to maybe force number 2, and I would start with my golf ball. I would hit the ball, start the timer at the same time, and then stop it when it got to the end. I would then take that same force number 2, and I would reset my timer, and I'd hit the timer on and turn it off when it hits the box again. So if you notice, we have a few things going on in this experiment, a few things going on with what we're doing. We have our force, we have our two objects, we have some measurements being taken in distance and time, and now we have our experiment that's going to help us figure out what's going on with our pod in space. So using what you know about independent, dependent, and control variables, using what you just observed within our mock experiment, your job is to click on that amplify link and go through and identify what is our independent variable in this new experiment. What were we changing or testing within the experiment? The second one is, what is our dependent variable? What are we observing change within our experiment? What are the results of that independent variable being tested? And then you're going to go through the other ones. What were some controls? What were some things we kept the same as we tested the within the experiment? And then you're going to also look at two other questions about what we were doing in the experiment. So your job, if you have questions about what our independent, dependent, and control variable are, okay, reach out to me. Let's figure it out. If you feel like you have a good idea of what they are within our experiment, you can go ahead and click on that amplify link and record them. If you have questions, reach out to me. Otherwise, good luck.